Well, welcome everyone to our very first webinar as Chax Training and Consulting. And Chad and I are really excited to bring to you today accessible deliverables. What will it cost and how long will it take? A few housekeeping items. You can post questions in the chat as we're talking. We may be able to take the answer those questions as we go, but we're going to answer questions at the end. So if you want to do that, you can. And then, of course, there's a poll that you can answer. And then at the end of this presentation, there'll actually be a questionnaire we'd love you to fill out so that we can get feedback on how well we're doing. And all that to say, my name is Dax Castro. I'm an Adobe certified PDF accessibility trainer. I am a 50-year-old male with salt and pepper hair and a goatee.
And my name is Chad Chilius. I'm an accessible document specialist as well as an Adobe certified instructor. And Dax and I have joined forces and created Chax Training and Consulting so that we can help other people with their accessibility journey. You can find out more about us at our website, which is at accessibilityunraveled.com. You can also reach out to either of us directly. Dax's email is training@accessibilityunraveled.com, and mine is chad@accessibilityunraveled.com. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to check out our podcast that we release every week. You can access that at chaxchat.com or on whatever your favorite podcast platform is. And also of major importance, be sure to check out the PDF Accessibility Facebook group where you can go and ask questions. We have 2,400 members currently in the Facebook group. And it's really cool to just see people post questions and have people answer and provide guidance to everybody. So be sure to check that out.
All right. Without further ado, we've all been there, right? We've all had proposals, RFPs come across our desk that say this document content must be comply with web content accessibility guidelines. In this sample, it says WCAG 2.1 level AA. Sometimes it says they just must be compliant. Other times it just says it must meet section 508. The requirements for those are kind of all over the place, right? So what does accessibility really mean? Is it WCAG 2.0, 2.1, AA, single A, PDF, UA, HHS, right? And sometimes even agencies, mostly in the Canada regions, will say your documents need to be tested with a screen reader to ensure usability, right? Well, the truth is, in the United States, Section 508 requires web content accessibility guidelines at a 2.0 level A and AA, depending upon the success criteria. And we can find that in the subsection E205.4 accessibility standards, where it says that electronic content shall conform to a level A and AA conformance in WCAG 2.0, right? And then it gives you some exceptions to the rule, but it is 2.0, even though some agencies may require something different. So make sure you check that out. But how do you measure compliance, right? Maybe you're using the PAC checker or the PAC 3 or PAC 2021, right? That just came out. Maybe you're using just Acrobat Checker, right? How about Common Look Validator? Or sometimes the agencies really don't care. They just say it must be compliant and they take your word for it. But who assumes that level of risk, right? You're the expert. They rely on you. It says it in the contract. So guess who the risk is going to fall back on? So I find that some agencies really, they're fishing. They don't understand the requirements for accessibility. So, or maybe they have some misconceptions like you have to have table summaries or no blank cells or, whatever the case may be. They don't really fully grasp what is the requirements for a document to be made accessible. So where does that risk fall on? It falls on you. Now, there are two paths to accessibility. We have accessibility along the way, and then we have accessibility at the end. And accessibility at the end comes with some serious pitfalls. So a lot of the time we hear, oh, well, you can just do this at the end, right? You can just, when we're done, we'll give you the PDF and then you can handle it from there. I know I see some of you probably smiling right now virtually because somebody has said that exact thing to you. And oh, we're just reusing last year's content, and they said it was accessible last year, and we should be fine. Right? That is a misnomer, because remember, accessibility education is growing more and more. And every year, people are becoming more and more understanding of what it means to be accessible, and what somebody might not have really paid attention to last year they pay attention to a little bit more this year. Right. And then, of course, we're always dealing with short turnaround times. And then we have mandated posting deadlines, right? We've got these deadlines that are that require a document to be posted online by a certain date, whether it's for public opinion or based on contract or funding. And all of these things are like kind of lend to the idea of accessibility at the end. But accessibility along the way is a great way to do it if you follow some 3 key steps, right? First of all, you need to understand what makes a document compliant. And if right now you're struggling with what that is, Chad and I can provide training for you and your teams, whether it's a team of 1 or a team of 100, to teach you what makes a compliant document. And you need to have an accessible workflow, a workflow that allows accessibility along the way, so that you can develop a way to inject accessibility a little bit at a time, so that it's not just dumped on someone at the end. And we can help you by analyzing your current workflow and giving you a roadmap, like we did for the World Bank, to be able to understand how the process works, to be able to create a more smooth process. Because everybody says, accessibility is hard. Well, it's not really hard if you do it along the way. And that all stems to accessible templates, and having those accessible templates really makes things easier. When you have an accessible template, you're able to go in and know that the workflow you have is going to make for an easy remediation at the end. And sometimes, in some cases, no remediation at all, because you're able to handle it all inside the template. So the accessibility at the end comes with some pitfalls here, right? Often we wait till the end, and then all of a sudden we've got 12 pages of scanned tables that somebody didn't tell you about. And you're like, okay, well, what do we do now? It's due in 12 hours or due in 24 hours. And who's going to write alt text or recreate these tables, which is really the appropriate approach to make the tables accessible rather than just applying alt text. Right. And a lot of times this results in partial compliance. You're like, we don't have time for that this time, so we're just going to handle it next time. We'll do better next time. But sometimes this can result in the client rejecting the work, or even being sued for non-compliance or a barrier to information. So what are the things that we can do? There are 8 things that can completely derail your budget and schedule. They're called the infamous 8. And so the infamous 8, Chad's going to tell you all about that.
Thanks, Dax. So, Dax and I have coined this term, the infamous 8, because they're kind of like the 8 key things that will completely derail your budget and your schedule. So let's just talk about them in a quick overview. So one of the first things is styles, right? Several applications that we use, including Word and Adobe InDesign, utilize styles to provide formatting to content within your document. But one of the key things from an accessibility standpoint is that's how we create a connection between the text in the document and the tags. We can also add alternate descriptions to images. Figures fundamentally don't have any value, so we need to describe them in their context. Maps and infographics. We want to make sure that any maps or infographics that we have in our document are also accessible. Same thing applies to charts and graphs. Charts and graphs, we have bar charts, line graphs, pie charts, they kind of run the gamut. And so we want to make sure that those charts and graphs are accessible, or as accessible as they can possibly be. Tables. This is a tricky one, right, guys? We've all dealt with problematic tables, and we're going to review a couple of examples of those and talk about some of the ways that we can make them accessible. Formulas, scientific documents, any document that contains math, those formulas need to be made accessible so that the user understands what their meaning is. Fillable PDF forms, right? We want to make sure that any forms that we provide to the end user can be filled out by them and that they are also accessible so that they can be interpreted using assistive technology. And finally, scanned content. That's another challenging situation that we run into. And scanned content is the enemy, right? They essentially, again, like a figure, have no inherent value. So let's dive into each one of these a little bit further. So with our styles, both Word as well as Adobe InDesign have the ability to create styles. Word has default styles you can use, but not only are they a significant part of accessibility, but they also are providing super efficient formatting of content in your document. So they serve multiple purposes and have multiple benefits. But in the context of what we're talking about here, accessibility is the key. Alternate descriptions, right? So every image, every figure we have in our document needs to be described in its context. On my screen right now, I have an image of a cyclist on the right-hand side, and the alt text I wrote for this is a young cyclist wearing a helmet, sunglasses, and a purple and white jersey competing in a gravel race fighting for position. So I'm describing that image in its context. A lot of times people will say, man riding a bike. That's not really providing really what the user needs. We need to describe that image sufficiently. The next thing is scanned and ganged content. So this is really, the same topic here, right? Adding alternate text. But in this situation, this is one figure with 9 individual images within it. This creates a real problem for me to describe, how do you describe 9 images in one alt text field? It's very difficult and not a great user experience. So Dax and I have ways that we can guide you and instruct you on better approaches that will save you both time and money as you're building your accessible PDF files. So when you're dealing with your images and graphics, questions you need to answer. Are there any colorblind barriers, right? A lot of times we'll choose various color combinations that may be hard to decipher from somebody who is colorblind. The WCAG success criterion 1.4.1, which is use of color only, essentially makes it a violation to use color alone to define meaning. So we want to try to avoid that and avoid that pitfall when we're building our documents. What is the main purpose of the image? Answering this question is going to help you to describe it sufficiently. Also, key question, who will write the alternate text? If you guys follow our podcast, you've heard me say this many times. As a designer, I am the worst person in the world to write the alternate text for figures in a document. There are other people who are much better suited to that task, and they are the people who should be doing that. Finally, are we providing expanded descriptions for this image, right? Are we gonna provide additional information that is going to describe what that image is about? The next thing we're going to talk about here is colorblind considerations. On my screen right now, I have 2 of the same image. The one on the left is how it looks by default. On the right-hand side, I'm actually showing the same image as viewed by somebody who has red-green colorblind. And so you can see that if we compare the colors, if we look at this a little bit deeper, let me zoom in on this. You can see that on the left, we have like an orange solid line and a vertical green line. And when viewed using red-green colorblind simulation, those colors are indistinguishable from one another. So it kind of fails from a color contrast standpoint. Where it does succeed, however, is you'll notice that we made one line solid and another line a double rule. And that is one way to overcome the color limitation, because now they can be identified by their style instead of by their color. Are your legends using color only, right? So again, this is, violating WCAG success criterion about using the use of color alone. Here, they're using color to define an area in the map. The legend describes the purpose of the color, but there's no way to know where that color is applied in the map itself. Now, one way to overcome that is by adding labels to the color. And so by making a very minor change, a very small adjustment, we have now made this map accessible to somebody who has visual impairments. So again, these are things that Dax and I can walk you through, and we can sit with you, look at your files, and help you to find ways of overcoming some of the limitations that may exist in your documents. So in this example, here we're on the topic of tables. And I know you're all sitting there and probably be like, yeah, I've dealt with some monsters of a table before. We have a couple of examples here. The table that I have on the left right now, one of the key challenges that we face in a situation like this is they used cells as headers at various locations throughout the table. This is what we call a complex table. This table can be very hard to remediate. It can be hard to make accessible, but there are ways of achieving the end result, even though this was built as a single table. And it's further complicated by the fact that there are subcells, right? So in addition to like major categories, there are minor categories for the different route numbers. And so those also need to be defined as header cells. They can be really challenging. And then over here on the right, you can see they added some merge cells at the bottom of an existing table. Merge cells can present challenges, but it's not impossible. It can be done. But this is an example where they have kind of 3 different values in a single merge cell. That can definitely be problematic. So again, where Dax and I come into the equation is, we can help you address a lot of these challenges and show you alternative ways, some better approaches to solving the problems, and both of which are going to save you time and money, right? I mean, that we all want to do that, right? We all don't have enough time to get the job done, and we want to make it go faster and easier. Layout tables, right? So if you're not familiar with that term, a layout table is essentially a table that was used pretty much for formatting purposes only. A lot of times users will take a table and put elements in the cells just to line them up a certain way. This particular table fails significantly because you can see that one of the header cells is a date, and that's not very helpful, right? So the date is going to be read as a heading for all of the cells below it, which is not going to be a great experience. Blank cells are okay, right? Contrary to popular belief, Dax and I ran into a lot of users who tell us that they've been told that blank cells, you're not allowed to have blank cells. And one of the things that I always tell people, blank cells are okay for sighted users. They're okay for non-sighted users as well. One of the challenges we run into, you can see in this table, instead of leaving the cell blank, they put a dash in every cell. And I guess that was to kind of indicate that there's no value. I feel like a blank cell would indicate the same thing. The problem here is that dash is going to be read as content. So it'll likely be read as a hyphen, as a dash, as, depending on the font, it kind of depends on exactly how it will be read. But keep that in mind when you're building your tables. And again, Dax and I can look at the tables that you're using in your documents and kind of give you some guidance as to how you can overcome some of the problems that you're dealing with. Tables with colors as markers. These tables are often referred to as measles charts. I think I looked it up one time. I was curious where that term came from. And I think it was like back in World War II, because this was one of the ways that they kind of, tracked the pandemic. But you can see here, they did use a unique color to kind of differentiate between the values. But the challenge is, from a assistive technology standpoint, there's no difference between the dots of different color, at least not with additional effort on your part. So with a small change, there is a way that we can make them much easier to interpret, right? So now we're not using color alone. We've actually changed the shape of the object, which makes it much easier for a user to differentiate between those values. And again, these are things that Dax and I can help you with. Again, a lot of times people will say, well, how do other companies do it? That's a tricky question to ask because everybody's documents are different. So don't compare yourself to other companies. Focus on your content and making your content accessible. Tables that use symbols. I know you guys have all seen these. This is another classic example of the use of color alone, right? So in this particular example, when this is read using assistive technology, every check mark is going to be read the same way because there's no unique differentiator between the different colors. Again, not without additional effort on your part, okay? And then here's an example where they used color to define the value of the cell, but we made it better because here we used color and we used text. So now when a user reads this content, they're going to read either good, satisfactory, or adequate, and they'll understand the value. Again, this is the type of content that Dax and I really specialize in. We love to help users come up with alternative methods of presenting information that is as accessible as possible. I'm glad I'm not remediating this table today, but this is just a kind of a classic example. So some takeaways when you're dealing with tables: evaluate the designs early, right? Accessibility kind of forces us to reevaluate our design. And I've run into many situations where a client has looked at their table and said, you know what, we really don't need to do it this way. We can do it a different way that's going to facilitate making the content more accessible. And design new tables with accessibility in mind will save you time and certainly save you money as well. All right. Who's writing the alternate text for these? I can tell you it's not me. And, when it comes to formulas, and I don't know what they're called, but I know within a formula, all of those individual elements have a name and they can be described appropriately. And once again, you want the right person doing that. Dax and I have a script that is for Adobe InDesign that allows you to extract all the images in the document as a spreadsheet and write the alternate text into that spreadsheet. So you can give the spreadsheet to your client, say, write alternate text for this, and then you can, in InDesign, re-import it back into all of the figures. It's a deal breaker, guys. It's a huge time saver, and it allows the right person to write the alternate text for those images. Oops, I went too far. There we go. Charts and graphs. So at the top here, we have some bar charts. And once again, you can see that we have utilized the use of color alone. But small changes can meet compliance. And so if you look at the examples on the bottom, you can see that we added labels to each bar. And now we know the exact value of each of those bars. What we've also done is improve the color contrast in the legend so that every user can easily see what the values mean within this document. So you want to start with an understanding of what makes a chart compliant, and then those charts can be created and still be made compliant like we did here. We've all seen this guy, right? We've all seen those flow charts. And so, these flowcharts can certainly be challenging in some cases, but we can ask the question, how do we need to make this compliant? Do we write alternate text for it? Do we add expanded descriptions? Or do we put a list in here that can more easily be interpreted by assistive technology so that the information can be interpreted by all users, right? And again, guys, these are the things that Dax and I can help you with, right? This flowchart can definitely be made compliant when using the right technique, okay? Forms, right? Nothing frustrates me more than when I get a form that somebody wants me to fill out and it is not a fillable form, right? Now, if you're a more advanced user, that there are techniques that you can use to fill them out, but the average person is going to print it out, fill it out with a pen and then scan it back in. And that is definitely not going to be accessible. So Dax and I can show you how to make existing PDF files fillable forms. We can also show you how to create fillable forms directly inside of InDesign, which really saves you a lot of time in the long run. Appendices, right? So if an appendices is not part of the deliverable, consider providing it as a supplement not posted to the internet, right? If the appendices was not part of the requirement, don't include it, okay? Scanned content is definitely the enemy, and I could tell you that oftentimes in the appendices, it's all scanned content. But keep in mind, guys, that you can require that your subs create the accessible documents. And Dax and I can help to write guidance for those users so that when they provide you with the PDF files, that they are accessible right from the sub. And we can also give you guys instructions on how to better, get the documents that you need. All right. So Dax is going to talk about the level of effort in what's required to make your documents accessible. Is everybody hearing Dax?
There we go. How about I unmute myself? There we go. Thank you so much, Chad. And great job in describing all those different pitfalls. And I've been watching the chat and people were saying, we're descending through the levels of accessibility hell with all the different examples. That makes me feel great to know that I picked the right images that emote fear and anxiety in those of us who are remediating our documents. Also, we do have checklists that we can help you deal with your subs. It's so hard sometimes when you're dealing with subs. How do you get them to understand what it is for accessibility? And we can do training for them, hold training events online or in person. We can help you get those guidelines and definitely develop a great relationship between you and the sub to create an accessible final deliverable. Right? So how do we evaluate our document project, right? So is it WCAG or PDF UA, or is it some custom standard? We need to understand the standard first before we can understand what the level of effort is. And how complex is my document? Is it full of merge cells and spreads and multi-page tables? How much of each item do I have? Is it almost all tables or almost all maps or almost all scanned content? And when did you consider accessibility? Did you consider it along the way, or are you doing accessibility at the end? And finally, who will be remediating the documents? Because now if someone's a beginner user and they're really not familiar with accessibility, this chart might be a little skewed for them. This chart assumes that you have 1 year basic experience and that you can do a relatively good job. And of course, everybody gets stuck now and again, but for the most part, what to do and where to go and how to make your documents accessible, right? So let's take a look at this chart as a whole, right? So in your handout, you should have got this email already. There is a PDF document. In the email, you can click on the image or you can click on the body text. I know in the text chat, somebody was saying that maybe the image was blurry. I'm not sure what happened there, but I apologize. It's not the image inside the email that we're giving you. uh, does this level of effort start at the PDF? No, because we'll go through that here in just a second. Good question, Victoria. So in this table, we have four columns. We have beginner, basic document, intermediate document, advanced document, and worst case scenario. And then on the left, we have rows that signify text percentage, headings, styles, figures, tables, infographics, maps, scanned content, and is the source available? So there's the answer to that question, Victoria. And then, of course, how many pages per hour based on these questions, right? So if you use this chart correctly, we can look through all these different cells, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but let's take a look at how we might use this. I'm going to take this chart and I'm going to go, okay, I've got mostly text and I've got simple headings. Somebody used styles and it's in order. So those are good. But I've got no alt text for my figures and they fail contrast. I've got infographics with no alt text, or no one supplied alt text with my maps. I've got some letters that have scanned content in the back that I've got to figure out how to OCR these and check your spam there, Shop Cow. It might be in your spam. And if you didn't receive this and you still don't have it, email me directly, and there's also a link in the chat. Here, let me see. Let me post that link again. Let's see. There it is. There's the link in the chat, right? So if you, as you walk through this document, this chart, you start figuring out, okay, how many in each column do I have? And then based on the amount of items in each column, you'll kind of be able to average out where you are on a pages per hour. Now, this is something that I've developed over the 8 years of me doing accessibility remediation and understanding how long something takes, right? Now, in this case, we've got lots of things in the advanced and worst case scenario, but we've got some good things in the basic column, right? And so if you were to figure this out on average, you're probably somewhere in between 10 and 25 pages per hour. And based on the amount of each of the elements, you're probably a good estimate of somewhere between 15 and 20 pages per hour. But again, it really depends. It really depends on how much of each content. If you only have 5 maps that really need some work and the rest of it's basic, even though you technically have something in the advanced column, it doesn't mean that your whole document's going to take 10 pages per hour. So you kind of have to use this with a grain of salt. And Itzel mentioned something very poignant in the chat, how long something takes if you have the experience to do it correctly. And again, this is where Chad and I can help your teams with accessibility training, so we can give you some real world experience on what to do and how to speed up. And we've got lots of tools that we can give you on how to speed up this workflow, because at the very, very beginning, you definitely know it can be a lot of work, right? So another thing to really consider, and this is where, again, Chad and I, we can interview your teams, figure out what your current workflow is, because if you don't know where you are, then you don't know how to get to where you want to go. And we can help you identify some of the accessibility workflow issues. How do I inject accessibility along the way at each of these different milestones? We've helped the World Bank, we've helped the University of Chicago, and several other organizations develop accessible workflows, right? So what does an accessible workflow look like? Well, first of all, you need to figure out what the overall style and color is. Starting with an accessible style and accessible color palette are key. And then, how many images, charts, and graphs am I going to be doing? Who's writing the alt text for those? Do they have accessibility training to understand what it takes to make those charts and graphs accessible? Knowing that can really cut down the time it takes to make a document accessible. Right? And then, of course, tables. How many tables do we have? Are we reusing last year's tables? And being able to understand, hey, let's evaluate those last year's tables and figure out, are there any major barriers that we need to fix in between last year and this year? Right? And then one of the things you need to understand is, does my agency require table summaries, which are kind of like alt text for tables? And if it is required, who's writing that? And then, of course, we have text content. What kind of text content are we writing accessibly? Do we have a good heading structure? Does that person understand the levels that we need to have when we're writing for accessibility in mind? Right? Then we're going to go through those changes and revisions. And at this point, you're going to export an accessible PDF draft, right? Because you've already included some accessible principles. This is the time to go check that PDF while all of the other people are making their changes and it's being circulated around for review. We want to make sure that that you can change all of the things in the back end that you need to change so that you're able to finish strong, so that when you finally do that accessible PDF, you're really just dotting I's and crossing T's, right? So I will say the key elements to avoiding accessibility pitfalls are: start early. I can't express this enough. Get people involved, get your accessibility team reviewing those projects early on. Create a logical structure for your document. And this goes to not just people who are using screen readers, but it benefits everyone to have a clear and logical structure. Plan for the infamous 8, as Chad said. We want to make sure that we understand what those pitfalls are, and we can help you identify how to overcome those specific to your situation. And of course, get accessibility training. If you haven't been to accessibilityunraveled.com, I'm assuming you were because you got to this webinar. Take a look at some of our courses, and in the feedback at the end of this session, tell us what courses you'd like to see us tackle first. We're open to listening to what you have to say. Chad? You're muted. You did it.
we're trying to be polite and not make sounds while the other one's talking. Thanks a lot, Dax. So just to kind of review, Dax and I joined forces for a number of different reasons, but one of the main reasons was because we wanted to help users in this accessibility journey. And so what he and I are doing is we're offering accessibility awareness presentations. A lot of times we know the position you guys are in, and sometimes it's hard to get buy-in from the higher ups. And so we often will provide presentations to kind of help those people to understand the value and why accessibility is so important within your organization. We offer document accessibility review. If you're struggling with making your documents compliant, you could send your documents over. We can evaluate them and provide guidance on how to make them fully compliant. We also offer workflow evaluation. Dax and I have been talking throughout this webinar about starting early, and doing that is part of the workflow, right? You have to implement accessibility into your workflow. So we could come into your organization, evaluate how you're making documents compliant, and provide guidance and training on how to do it better. We offer an accessibility best practices guide that we can tailor to your organization that you can use as a blueprint for how documents become accessible within your organization. We offer accessible template design, whether it's Word, PowerPoint, InDesign. We can help you to create a rock solid template so that as those templates get populated, when you make that accessible PDF file, a lot of the work is already done. One of the key things we do is offer accessibility training, whether it be Word, PowerPoint, PDF, made to tag, you name it. We offer accessibility training for your organization. And finally, we can offer you time-saving accessibility tool demos, right? So not only can we demo the main products that you're familiar with, but we can also demo third-party products such as Made to Tag, Access PDF, Access Word, that will help you guys in making your documents accessible. We need to remember that we don't have to only use the product that's in front of us. Sometimes it's worth investing in other products to facilitate the process.
And finally, I have a special offer for everyone in this presentation right now. Now, our document testing with a screen reader is coming up this June 7th, next Tuesday. And the $75 discount was supposed to expire last Friday. but I'm holding it open for the next 48 hours. I'm going to give you time to go talk with your bosses and try to get buy-in for this, but only for the next 48 hours am I going to give you the time to take that additional $75 off so that you can attend this event. If you want to check, if you want to understand how to effectively test your document with a screen reader, this is the event for you. Now you're going to need NVDA, so you're going to have a PC and a pair of headphones. But if you have those two things, you're going to get so much out of this training. You can go to bit.ly/Chax events, and that's capital C and capital E for Chax events. Or you can just go to accessibilityunraveled.com and look at the top of the screen for our document tester testing with a screen reader. This is going to be open for the next 48 hours and only 48 hours. And then we're going to cut it off just to be fair to everyone else who's already registered.
All right, guys. So just to review, Chax and I have opened up the Chax Training and Consulting organization to kind of help you guys with all of your accessibility needs. You can find out more about us at accessibilityunraveled.com. You can reach out to Dax or I directly by using our email addresses, which is training@accessibilityunraveled.com or chat@accessibilityunraveled.com. Be sure to check out our podcast. We release one each week, and you can find that at chaxchat.com or on any of your major podcast platforms. And then the PDF Accessibility Facebook group is a huge resource for people when you run into that problem of, why is my screen reader reading this way? And you'll get a lot of great answers and guidance.
And I will tell you guys, the best way is to reach out. Well, an additional way to reach out. We have 2,400 members in that Facebook group. It is a well-rounded group of lots of individuals. I would really highly suggest it. And you can see in the chat, people are echoing how much the Facebook group has helped them. I just received an email this morning that said in between the Facebook group, the podcast, and the training they've received from us, that they just could not have passed the accessible document specialist test, which is actually, a little shameless plug for the IAAP. They have an accessible document specialist certification. Chad and I actually helped write that certification. And awesome. Janik just said, I've just passed my ADS, right? Congratulations.
Oh, nice.
It is a great resource. And you can reach out directly to me, 916-856-9347. You can call me directly. I promise you I will answer your questions and get you, maybe just some clarification. I did want to take the last few minutes. I know we're down to just 2 minutes worth of time, but we are going to stay after to allow for additional questions. But I wanted to answer one of the questions that someone had. They said, when you say templates, what sort of templates are you talking about? For my office, templates are things like Word templates, where we set up a document so users can just drop their content in. What do we mean by templates? Well, I'll tell you that accessible templates start with a good use of styles, right? Making sure we're not using floating text boxes everywhere, or that we're not using tables to build our title pages, things like that. Those are the things that we're going to help you set that document up with. And there's also a product called Access Word that's a plugin for Word that can help you make completely compliant, and I'm not kidding when I say completely compliant, PDF files from your Word document. But that takes a little bit of extra training, and we can definitely help you with that. Right. So I'd like to open it up. We do have a couple of questions. Carol said, I was told that when creating Excel files, the cells within should not be left blank. So what you just noted in the presentation is relevant for Word only, or does it apply to Excel also? So I will tell you that blank cells inside Excel are okay too. Now, you should hide all of the extra blank cells that are not part of your main table, but it's not a barrier to have a blank cell in your table. They're able, if you use headings in your table, they're able to identify where they are within that table. When it becomes a problem is when you have blank heading cells in your table, or when you have multiple tables on a single sheet inside Excel. So there's some best practices there that you definitely want to handle. So let's see, are there any other questions? So Sylvia said, it took 6 hours to create a tagged 255-page PDF. Is that about right for how long things will take? Well, based on what we learned in the session, right, our chart, it's going to depend on how much content was in there that were, specialty content, as to whether or not that's okay. Now, 6 hours for 255 page document, again, I could say, sure, that sounds great, but if it was all text with just headings, it's probably a little excessive. But if it was, 50-50, maybe that's a good time. So, Chad, do you see any more questions?
I mean, I'm answering some in the chat as they pop up.
I know Alice had a question there.
How do you get, how do you suggest getting started with InDesign if you've already been tagging in Acrobat? I mean, Alice, I did respond to you in the chat, but, essentially, starting with the PDF is always the hard way, right? It's the hard way. It's the time consuming way. It's the expensive way. It's certainly possible, but if you do it in InDesign, I could tell you that you will save an exorbitant amount of time and money and effort, because InDesign really does a great job. And if you combine that with the Made to Tag plugin, I could tell you most of the documents I output are fully compliant right out of the chute. So it's, you just leverage some tools and you can really, you can really reduce the amount of time it takes to make these documents compliant. Yeah, InDesign is the bomb. I mean, Word is great too, but I'm biased.
Summer had a good question. She said, Chad, maybe you can answer this. She says, I often check, I have often had a document pass PAC 2021, but not the Acrobat Checker. Which is the best? Can you explain which is correct?
Sure. I mean, the problem is that the Acrobat Checker, unfortunately, does not check to any known standard. It doesn't check to, it doesn't fully check to WCAG. It doesn't fully check to PDF UA. So the Acrobat Checker can sometimes give what we call false positives, right? It can identify things that really are not an issue. The Acrobat Checker, I use it at a very basic level, right? The Acrobat Checker is good to let you know, oh, I got my headings out of order, or, oh, I forgot alternate text. But beyond that, it doesn't check to any standard. So that's where Dax and I reach for the PAC checker, because it is checking to the PDF UA and the WCAG standards and lets us know of any obvious issues. And then of course, we also check with a screen reader to just make sure that there's no major problems with the document.
Hey, I've got to answer this question because it's one that is a pet peeve of mine. Melinda Ma said, I was in an accessible document workshop last week, and the instructor said there should only be one heading level 1. And he said there are only a few exceptions to this, and having multiple headings first is non-standard. I will tell you, this is one of the biggest myths in document accessibility. It even says it in WCAG that your document can have more than one H1. So if someone's teaching that there can only be one H1, they're not reading the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines in itself. Your document needs to be well structured. So if that means your title is an H1 and everything else is H2s, that's a good structure. There's nothing wrong with that. But if I know I only have 6 levels I can use, and I need that H1 for all of my chapter headings, then I'm going to use the H1 for the title and the H1 for all of my chapter headings, so that I have a logical structure to the document. So you can have more than H1. It's not a viable, it is not a rule that you can only have one H1. One H1 is for HTML documents, and they've really just adopted that one H1 rule to document accessibility, and it's really not the same, right? Mm-hmm. You really can use in a web page. Think about it. It is one entire long single page, and you have a nested structure, an H1, and everything else is a subset of that H1. In a PDF document, you have lots of compartmentalization, lots of different structured areas. And so it's not limited to just one page, right? Awesome. Any other questions you're seeing, Chad? Thank
No,
you so much for everybody for coming. I know we are long, but I will stick around and answer questions as long as you have. So feel free to answer the poll at the end, and give us the feedback, because we'd love to be able to present more of these for you in a way that is meaningful.
Absolutely.
Chad, do you have any recommendations for Mac users?
I am a Mac user, right? And the harsh reality is that, with the made to tag is Mac and Windows, right? As far as that goes. But when it comes to the accessibility tools and the screen readers, Windows is the only platform they support. So I run Parallels on Mac. You could buy Parallels, online or wherever. And then that allows you to install Windows on a partition of your hard drive. You might need a little bit of guidance, getting that set up, but it's really not too bad. You just need Parallels and a Windows install, and you can get it installed on your machine.
Awesome. Guys, well, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead, I think, and end. If you want to reach out to us, you can find us on Facebook, or I pasted the link inside the chat, or you can just search PDF accessibility. You can also find either Chad or myself on LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to answer those questions. Or you can reach out to us phone or email. We're always happy to hear from you. Again, I hope you enjoy that PDF, and we'd love to see you in our next classes. Thank you so much, guys, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.